Good morning. Welcome to the 31st Annual Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission Fundraising Breakfast. Would you please stand while Anoka High School student Ashley Wongby sings our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Have a seat, folks. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Scott, and I have the honor of serving as the chair of the Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission. Can you folks hear me back there? Dave Small says no. I guess I better speak up, Sergeant. Thanks to Ashley for graciously agreeing to sing our national anthem here today. Ashley is a student at Anoka High School, and she serves in the choir there, and we very much appreciate your attendance here today, Ashley. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody. This is our 31st annual Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission fundraising breakfast. On the back of your programs, you can see the list of the many, many speakers we've had in previous breakfasts. We have another wonderful speaker today. Jeff Potts is here. He is the executive director of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association, and he will be formally introduced a little bit later. We're going to have to get a little longer page. I think that list fills up darn near the back page of the program. I want to thank you all for attending this wonderful event. Once again, we have many familiar faces who've attended this in the past. This has been a challenging year once again in law enforcement in our country in general, but as we all know, we're all going to be okay, folks. We're all going to be okay. We're grateful to all our members of our community who participate in this community event. I want to mention a couple of our corporate sponsors. Pump Tech Corporation is one of our many corporate sponsors. Pump Tech is located here in the industrial park. Is Alan Staples here with Pump Tech? Alan? Thank you, Alan. Jim Cook, I think, is a principal. Jim is one of our board members who couldn't make it today, but he's got a wonderful participation from Pump Tech. Alter Metal Recycling is located here in Anoka, and Greg O'Leary is here, I believe, representing Alter Metal. Federal Cartridge is another one of our wonderful sponsors, very generous to the Anti-Crime Commission. Is Eric Carlson here today from Federal? I know they got a table, and many other generous business and corporate sponsors, including St. Stephen's is one of our wonderful sponsors, the Anoka Lions Club, Anoka Legion, and the Anoka County Attorney's Office, who is here as well. I want to once again thank Maine Floral for our wonderful floral arrangements at each table, and likewise I want to thank Greenhaven for the special pricing we are allowed for this event. Next, I'm going to introduce our pastor today, who's going to give us our opening prayer. Pastor Evenson of United Methodist, she just is fairly new to the Anoka community, although she is from Anoka County, pretty much a lifelong resident. Her dad is a retired Washington County judge, Bill Ekstrom. He couldn't make it today, but she is, I believe, a Coon Rapids High School graduate, or was it Spring Lake Park, Pastor? We forgive you for that. In any event, Pastor Evenson has graciously agreed to come today and provide us with some opening remarks and an opening prayer. Pastor Evenson.
Thank you so much. I did grow up in Anoka County. I grew up in Blaine, and thank you for having me here. I know a few of your faces. I was with Meals on Wheels a number of years ago. I worked with Meals on Wheels, and I saw a lot of you at the Texas Roadhouse fundraisers. So it's good to be back again. And I appreciate the opportunity to bless you and to be here with you and to bless this time that we have together. Will you pray with me? Holy and loving God, here on this day and in this place, we are gathered as a part of the community that cares for others. We care for those who live and work here. We care for those who are in danger. We care to keep people safe. Help us to do our best, to love others, to care for those who are alone. Today we pray for neighborhoods and a community where all feel welcomed and safe. Help us to strive to create that and allow us to help our neighbors find safety in whatever their living situation. God, we pray for each of those gathered here who work to keep people safe. Many neighborhoods experience marginalization when big things are happening or from day to day. God, as we prepare and continue to celebrate here in this community in a time of bringing people together, help us to remember those who are alone, those who are not cared for. Bless each person here, each person in this community, all of the voices, all of those who we find as neighbors. God, we ask you to help those who are here gathered and who work together in this community to make wise decisions that affect all of us in the community. We pray they will be thoughtful in their decisions and listen to the voices of the community. We pray for the courage to do what's right each and every day and to live with grace and dignity and integrity. God, I ask your blessing upon this food that we are about to eat and the hands that prepared it, and all that went into bringing it to our tables. We ask this and all these things in our hearts today. In your name we pray. And everybody said, Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Evenson. Next, on behalf of the city of Anoka, for a greeting, I want to introduce City Councilman Brian Wesp. Brian is also on the board of directors of the Anti-Crime Commission. Brian is the self-appointed historian for the city of Anoka. Is that right, Brian?
No.
He's a dedicated public servant. He's got a great sense of humor. His golf game is questionable, however.
Absolutely.
And he's got a few special words for us here today. Brian?
Thank you, Michael. Oh, no, please. Anytime a tornado wants to sing, I want to listen. And Bill Goodrich, class of 63, that includes you too. Ashley, thank you. That was a wonderful rendition. And I know that only in Anoka, at Anoka High School, would you have learned to sing so well. Or you probably have that already, but you just tied it up they helped you tie it up real nice. Thank you, Ashley, I appreciate that. Welcome to Anoka. In his twilight years, General Douglas MacArthur was asked to come speak at West Point. As he left his Manhattan apartment, his doorman said, "General, where are you off to?" The general replied, "West Point." His doorman said, "Beautiful place. Have you ever been?" On that day in May 1962, on the plain at West Point, the Korean controversy was forgotten. Only the heroics mattered to the cadets who listened in awe as MacArthur explained the meaning of duty, honor, country. Those three hollow words, MacArthur told the cadets, reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, and what you will be. They are not a slogan or flamboyant phrase, he continued. They build your basic character. They mold you for your future role as custodians of the nation's defense, and they teach you to be an officer and a gentleman. He was speaking about the military. But today we come to honor our police force, especially in the city of Anoka, where the Anti-Crime Commission works to help and works to work hand in hand with our police department. Today you're going to hear about duty, honor, and country, or city. Today you're going to hear about how an officer who spent hours and hours and hours training his fellow companion, Bravo, and yet had to send Bravo into harm's way where the dog eventually was shot in the throat, but potentially saved the lives of many people. Today you're going to hear about an officer who would get up every single day, do the work that needed to be done, help the people that needed to be helped, who passed away. Today you're going to hear about a police department that looks at duty, honor, and country, or city, as something not flamboyant, or something not irreverent, but a calling to defend those of us who need to be defended. So from the City Council, our mayor, from the city of Anoka, welcome to the Anti-Crime 31st Breakfast. Thank you.
As you've heard, the Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission was incorporated in 1991, going on 32 years now, at the insistence of Councilman John Weaver, Councilman John Mann, and Chief Andy Revering, who, when Andy is insistent, Andy usually got what he needed to get done. The Board of Directors does meet the third Tuesday of each month at 7:29. That was John Weaver's idea as well. 7:29 is much more memorable to most people than 7:30. People would oversleep at 7:30, but 7:29 they're going to be here. That was John's theory. We do make decisions regarding requests for funding contributions from different organizations and groups. So we provide input to the staff and administration of the police department from the public's perspective, and we are updated by staff from the police department about crime trends and safety issues in our city by the chief and by the investigative staff of the Anoka Police Department. We have really a partnership, and the chief is going to talk more about that. The public and law enforcement, which we believe is a model for what many other communities we believe in the state and the country for that matter are developing for public participation with their law enforcement agencies. This past year, the commission continued to support public safety and law enforcement in our community. I'm pleased to announce the Anti-Crime Commission was awarded the 2022 Minnesota Crime Prevention Association Crime Prevention Team of the Year Award at their conference in Cragans. We've got a nice trophy up at the head table, was awarded to the Anti-Crime Commission just last month. With your generous donations, we did fund the purchase of Canine Bravo's replacement. Bravo was caused to retire because of health issues unrelated to the shooting that was talked about earlier, but nonetheless, Canine cane was purchased with the use of the funds of the Anti-Crime Commission through your generous donations. We also contributed a substantial amount to the gun range simulator. You may have noticed the new structure being constructed next to the Public Safety Building on 3rd Avenue, right by the fire station, police station. That's a animal control facility as well as a gun range. And that, we believe, is significant in the training of law enforcement officers, not just our agency here in the City of Anoka Police Department, but other agencies as well will have the use of that and available for their training purposes. We also supported many other efforts of the Anoka Police Department, public outreach, the Anoka Explorer program. We provided scholarships so the explorers could attend their annual convention. The Alexandra House is another beneficiary of our funds. And again, many of the community events, the chief will talk a little bit more about those. I want to thank each board member for their individual financial and time commitment. We all, I know, want Anoka to be a safe place to work, to live, to raise our families, and attend our schools as well. Next, I want to introduce Anoka Police Chief Eric Peterson. Eric has served as the Chief of Police now for nearly 6 years. He's been employed by the Anoka Police Department since June of 1989, 33 plus years. He has spent his entire law enforcement career here in Anoka. I think he started out as a security officer or a CSO, and he rose through the ranks, a patrol officer, sergeant. He was our captain and wisely appointed chief by our city administration. He has earned a number of medals from the Anoka Police Department, Police Officer of the Year in 1999. He's initiated many community-based activities, having the police engage the members of the public at social functions and the like. He's from Coon Rapids as well. We had Chief Wise come and talk to the group here as Commander Lensmeyer here a couple of weeks ago, and Chief Wise talked about things involving Coon Rapids. As you know, he was the chief there for many years, and when he got done, I said, Chief, we here in Anoka always considered Coon Rapids to be one of our suburbs, and I don't think he quite enjoyed that. In any event, being from Coon Rapids is forgiven, Chief, so I want to introduce Chief Eric Peterson.
Yeah, I got hired as a police officer at the age of 12. So I look young. No, I'm kidding. Before I begin, I have to thank, and I'd like to thank, all the elected officials and government officials in attendance this morning. It is the collaboration with elected officials and the Anti-Crime Commission that makes a difference in what we do. It is necessary in the world we live in today. I'd like to introduce a few of those folks, and please hold your applause before until I introduce them. That's here from the City of Anoka: City Manager Greg Lee, Councilmember Jeff Weaver, Councilmember Elizabeth Barnett, Councilmember Brian Wesp. For the City of Coon Rapids, I see Councilmember Brad Johnson's here, and I believe Mayor Cook is here as well. U.S. Representative Dean Phillips is here. State Senator Jim Ambler, Anoka County Attorney Tony Palumbo, Anoka County Sheriff James Stewart, the Honorable Judge Tom Fitzpatrick is here. The Honorable Judge Barry Sullivan was here. He just had to leave. Apparently he's not quite retired. From the Anoka Hennepin School District, Dr. Kate McGuire is here with her team. Thank you for coming. And Principal Mike Farley from Anoka High School. I apologize if I've missed anybody, but let's give them a round of applause. I want to thank them for their service to our city, to our county, to our country, and to our schools. The Anti-Crime Commission Board of Directors meets with me monthly, as Mike said, at 7:29 a.m., and I bring officers in, And there we discuss crime statistics and our share crime reports. Sometimes I share sad and tragic stories with the commission, and together we share our frustrations about what happens to victims of crime in our community. We have a great working relationship. This commission has a wide representation from our community, from business owners to elected officials, to homeowners to school officials. I listen to what these commission members tell me about what's important for our city, and together we focus on making positive changes for Anoka. Yearly, we hold an annual meeting where I present an in-depth crime report to the commission. You can view in your annual review that's on the table more in depth, but I'll present some of those today. I begin this presentation by covering some of the facts that are related to calls for service, and that can tell a lot about what our officers are responding to by way of crime. But what it doesn't tell you is what our community feels about the welfare of Anoka and what they expect of their police department. The Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission was the first and longest partnership the police department has had. This commission has stood by its police department and provided us support and funds necessary to expand our goals and expand our efforts and accomplish our goals. I'll explain a little bit more about our accomplishments in just a minute, but first I'd like to show you a brief snapshot of the 2021 crime report. And looking at some of the statistics from 2021, you'll notice that we continue to be a busy police department. We responded to 22,500 calls for service in 2021, and after a significant decrease in 2020, our calls for service have somewhat stabilized in 2021. In 2022 so far, we're expecting to have approximately a 5% increase in our calls for service. We still respond to over 60 calls for service per day, and we average about 8 to 10% of the calls for service in the county. Part A crimes are the most serious crimes we track. They include crimes like murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, arson, and auto theft. After a noticeable decrease in Part A crimes in 2020, we had a return to a more average number in 2021. This return to average was predictable, as 2020 was a year in which many of the businesses and bars were closed for extended periods due to the pandemic. Part A crimes had increased in 2021 by 13%. But in general, over the past 5 years, we have seen the Part A crimes trending downward, with the exception of auto theft and fraud-related crimes. Part B crimes are the crimes like disorderly conduct and trespassing, drunkenness, loitering, and domestics. Part B crimes have increased by 30% from 2020. We are aware that Part B crimes are the most frequently committed crimes. They are also the crimes that affect our community's quality of life. Going forward, we intend to focus heavily on reducing our Part B crimes. We know that these crimes are most likely to be seen in our community. There are crimes like vandalism. And when we reduce crimes like vandalism, we can also reduce the fear of crime. In 2021 and 2022, we had several changes in events that kept us busy, motivated, and engaged. We hired 5 new police officers, 2 of which were additions to our department that were previously approved by our city council. I should note that our city council has supported me in our efforts at every request and every need that I've had. And so I appreciate the addition of our staffing, and we're hoping to add another in 2023. Our patrol officers moved from a 12-hour shift from an 8-hour shift to a 12-hour shift, and this was done to provide better coverage, less overtime, and a more structured work schedule. And we did a complete overhaul of our department policies. And I should mention that the greatest city prosecutor in the state of Minnesota retired after 43 years of service to the city of Anoka. That would be Mike Scott, our chair. And construction has begun on our new law enforcement training center and animal containment facility. This facility will allow our officers to have the best training and not have to travel for it. In addition, our community's pets will have a place to be well cared for while they wait to be returned should they wander off. In the training center, there will be a training simulator. for law enforcement decision-making training is expected to be installed in the facility next month. The purchase of this equipment, and I'll expound on that a little bit later, was entirely done through donations. As Councilmember West mentioned, K-9 Bravo retired from police work in 2022. In February of 2021, K-9 Bravo was shot in the line of duty while apprehending armed criminals. He was recognized several times for his heroic efforts. At last year's breakfast, he was awarded the K-9 Purple Heart. Since then, the United States Police K-9 Association has awarded Bravo and Sergeant Soderberg the Patrol Case of the Quarter, the Act of Valor Award, and the 2021 National Patrol Case of the Year. Upon Bravo's retirement, we were able to obtain K-9 Kane. Kane and his handler, Officer Jack Holton, has just finished their training and certification as a police dog handler team. A special thank you to the Anti-Crime Commission, the American Legion, Edward B. Cutter Post 102, the Anoka Lions, and the Anoka Rotary for donations to make this purchase and training of K-9 Kane possible. And as Mike mentioned, I'm very happy to announce that the Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission was awarded the Minnesota Crime Prevention Team of the Year Award by the Minnesota Crime Prevention Association at their conference on October 4th. Chairman Scott attended to receive this award, and I have to say that we're very proud of this award because it highlights everything we've done for the past 31 years to make Anoka a safe place. On September 14th, we lost a very good friend of ours and co-worker, Officer Eric Grubner. Officer Grubner died suddenly of a medical emergency in his own home. Eric started his career on June 6th of 2013, and I had the pleasure of hiring him as a non-sworn employee. He was hired as a patrol officer on February 26th of 2014, and he served as an explorer advisor, a community-oriented policing and problem-solving officer, and as a respected member of our SWAT team. He had received many medals and commendations for his outstanding police work, to include the Chief's Achievement Medal for Officer of the Year just 2 years after he started. Eric was an exceptional police officer, an exceptional friend, and an exceptional man, and he was loved by so many in Anoka and respected by each one of our residents. The Anti-Crime Commission does not focus their efforts into just one area. They're aware that in order for us to be successful, they have to help us combat crime from multiple angles. This is why they invest in education, detection, public health, enforcement, and prevention efforts. The Anti-Crime Commission has expanded how the aid that they provide to the police that allows us to engage with our community. The Anti-Crime Commission supports us financially in almost all of the following areas: with home alone safety, emergency response alert stickers, popsicles in the park, house of worship security awareness preparation, bike helmet and car seat clinics, Citizens Academy, safety fair, cookout with the cops, Nights Unite, police explorers, police pals, neighborhood watch, and business crime watch. Almost every one of these programs were started by our crime prevention technician, Nicole Neese, back in the corner. We couldn't have done this without her assistance, and for that, I thank her for all of her efforts. In addition to the many prevention and education efforts, the Anti-Crime Commission is committed to donating towards equipment that is not normally budgeted for by the police department. These are just a few of the tools that they've supported over the past couple of years. Outfitting our armored rescue vehicle, the K-9 unit, with the assistance of purchase and training, less than lethal tools such as less than lethal launchers, tasers, and AEDs. And most recently, a contribution towards our training simulator to be installed in the law enforcement training facility next month. I'd also like to thank Federal Cartridge and a private donor to make the purchase of this equipment possible. Finally, the Anti-Crime Commission provides scholarships to youth organizations, and to the Alexandra House. For the police department to be successful, it needs the support of the community it serves. The Anti-Crime Commission has led the way in developing and maintaining a working partnership with the police department. The Anoka Police Department wants to thank all of you for attending this morning's breakfast and for your support of Minnesota law enforcement. I want to thank the citizen volunteers who make up the Anti-Crime Commission, and I want to thank you for your hard work and dedication. Anoka is fortunate to have each one of you serving our community. Thank you to the chairperson, Mike Scott, and the treasurer, Tom Jensen, and all the members of the board for your outstanding service. And a special thank you to my executive assistant, Julie Sputzhauser, in the back here also, for making this morning so organized and extraordinary. Thank you for attending, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Chief. And I want to thank all the police officers and employees of the Anoka Police Department, all local enforcement agencies, the Anoka County Sheriff's Office, and the Minnesota State Patrol for their efforts. This is a difficult time once again in law enforcement, and I know firsthand that our community is well served by these agencies. All their members exhibit a high degree of professionalism, along with a high standards and caring attitude, no matter what their position with their agency. We are fortunate in Anoka County, in the city of Anoka, for the leadership of these organizations. Now I want to ask all current law enforcement officers, staff, and all retired staff and officers to stand and be recognized. Please. Thank you for your service, each and every one of you. Next, I'm going to call upon Board Member and Vice Chairman Peter B. Berg to ask you to support the cause of the Anti-Crime Commission. Peter's the former mayor of Anoka. He was involved in law enforcement with the Anoka County Sheriff's Office, chief deputy for a period of time. He was with the Coon Rapids, another Coon Rapids connection here, Peter. He was a long-time resident of Anoka. No longer, I understand. Close, he's close. He's served on many boards as well, and he's been on the Anti-Crime Commission for many, many years. He's here with his family. His beautiful wife, Mary Jane, is with us as well. Good morning, dear. Peter, the mic is yours.
Thank you. It was great to listen to you talk, Mike. I learned as your vice president that I didn't get invited to some golf outings. I didn't get invited to some lunches. You and I got to talk. Okay, what is the favorite sport of a UPS employee? Boxing, okay. How important is today at this breakfast? As a young toddler growing up in Northeast Minneapolis, my dad had a shop down lower Northeast, and he made furniture from the ground up, and I had a chance to go there often. I later learned, coming from a big family, that I guess I was the kid in the family that needed a little more supervision. I learned to play with the young people down there, and one day, one of the mothers asked me to stay for lunch, and I didn't know what to do. I just said, no, I can't, and I left and I went back to the shop, and I kept watching, hoping the kids would come back, invite me back down, and all of a sudden, here comes these three women down the sidewalk, and I'm telling you, they weren't walking, they were charging. And I knew this wasn't going to be good because they're heading for our place. And as they got in, they took my dad off to the side. My dad spoke Polish fluently, and that's what went on, and I couldn't understand any of it. Other than I realized all of a sudden I'm being turned around, marched back up the sidewalk to the house where I was asked to stay for lunch. And as I got onto the sidewalk, you get that fresh baked bread smell wafting through the neighborhood. And they had those big porches, and it was a beautiful table, and it was all laid out. And in the middle of that table was one of those bowls where they had the whipped butter, and you could use a spatula to put it on the bread, to die for. And the bowl of soup in front of you was big enough that you could swim in it. And when I got back, my dad said to me, "Pete, how did you like the borscht?" I said, "What's borscht?" He said, "The soup that you had." I said, "It was delicious." He said, "Those ladies were offended by you not staying and sharing what they had. That they had got up that morning and went down to the farmer's market to get fresh vegetables, made that breakfast, that lunch, and that dinner. They didn't have much, but what they had, they wanted to share." And as a very young person, I realized how important it is for us to come together and to share a meal. When this organization formed 31 years ago, John, the two Johns that really got it going, wanted to have a breakfast. They wanted to share a meal with you to say thank you. So it's truly my pleasure today to ask for your time, your talent, and your treasure. You've heard the things that we've done. We have been good stewards with the money that you've entrusted with us, and we will continue to do that. At your table hosts have orange cards. You can, one, either fill it out today and leave your donation with the table host. You can take it home and mail it back in the envelope. And on there's also a website that you can do it through eBay. Again, you've been thanked, but I wish to thank you from all of the board of directors for entrusting us. God bless.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Good job. Next, I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Jeff Potts, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association. Once again, Jeff is originally from Coon Rapids. He graduated from Blaine High School, and he began his law enforcement career, I believe, as a CSO with the Coon Rapids Police Department, where his father was a police officer with that agency some time ago as well. He was offered a job at Coon Rapids, but he rejected that. He had a better offer from the city of Bloomington, and he began his career as a police officer in Bloomington, I believe, in 1991. He was appointed chief in 2008 until his retirement in 2020, and he was appointed the executive director of MCPA on February 1, 2021. Under Chief Potts' leadership, the city of Bloomington implemented a number of programs, including an emphasis on mental health of his officers, as well as the citizens of the city of Bloomington. He emphasized that his officers, as we do here in Anoka, treat all people fairly and justly. Without further ado, I want to introduce Chief Jeff Potts. Chief?
All right, I'm going to, sorry to the cable folks, I'm going to go mobile here for my presentation. Well, thank you for having me here, Mike, and to the chief. We met a few weeks ago, and I was very honored to be asked to come and speak to you folks. I can tell you that just looking in this room here, you guys are, the Anoka PD is blessed to have support like this, and to the folks that are in the room to support the efforts of the Anoka Police Department, I can't thank you enough, and I'm sure they're very appreciative of that. This is not the case in some parts of Minnesota, and so you guys are very fortunate, very lucky to have an organized, the Anti-Crime Commission organized organization like this to provide you with support. So I'm originally a Coon Rapids kid, I guess a suburb of Anoka, as was mentioned, and sometimes it's, you say it's good to be back home, and people say, yeah, right, why do you say that? I now live in Bloomington, but it is good to be back home in this area where I grew up. And just to make sure you trust me and believe me that I did grow up here, back in the 70s, the speaker just before me here, Mr. Pete Bieberg, he's not kidding when he says it's nice to break bread with people. People get closer when you do that. Back in the 70s, my dad was a police officer in the city of Coon Rapids, and we would go over to Pete and Mary Jane's house. Back then, even though they were probably in their 20s and 30s, they still got together for card club. And I think Pete also said a lack of adult supervision was a problem in North Minneapolis. Well, Steve, his son, and I would get together, and there was a lack of supervision at that time, too. Somehow we both ended up in law enforcement, but it's good to see Pete and Mary Jane and Denny Raihe, Rose back there. Those are friends from the family back in the 70s. My dad, who's no longer with us, was a very good friends with those folks up here, and it's good to be back up here to see you guys. So I'm here really to speak on behalf of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association. That we are an organization of about 315 police departments in Minnesota. 95% of them are members of the Minnesota Chiefs Association. We do many different things for them. I'll get into that in just a second, but as I mentioned, 315 police chiefs are members. 70% of the police departments in Minnesota are fewer than 20 officers, and actually 50% of the police departments in Minnesota have fewer than 10 officers. So we're a state that has a lot of police departments, but many of them are very small, and they need the services and support that the Chiefs Association provides for them. We also have about 144, 150 associate members. Those are command staff members from police departments across the state who want to be a part of our association for the benefits, the training and communications and different things that we offer. We have about 200, actually it's closer to 300 now, retired police chiefs who maintain a membership that really help us in terms of the services that we deliver. This handsome man, I was hoping he'd be seated over here with this table of chiefs from Anoka County. His name is Brian Werke. He's the police chief in Fridley. He actually serves as the president of the Minnesota Chiefs Association this current year. What do? We provide several different services. Legislative advocacy is probably one of the most important things that the Chiefs Association does. There's really three main law enforcement groups in Minnesota: the Minnesota Chiefs Association, the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, and the MPPOA, or the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. All three organizations work together. We're not always we don't always agree on everything, but we do agree to work together and work collaboratively on public safety issues that are being discussed at the legislature. We provide communication support for our members. We offer a number of different trainings. Training is vitally important to the quality of the law enforcement in a community, and we take that responsibility very seriously at the Chiefs Association. We also provide mentoring programs and some networking opportunities for our members. So over the last 3 or 4 years, you've probably heard a lot about law enforcement and the need for reform. As that was going on, the Chiefs Association, the Sheriff's Association, MPPOA were very actively involved. Beginning in 2020, after what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, this became central to what was going to be done at the legislature. In fact, just about every discussion that was being had about the legislature involved what kind of police reforms are going to be passed here in Minnesota. The Chiefs Association recognized the urgency and the seriousness and the need for some changes to be made, and we leaned into helping to make sure that whatever legislation was passed, it made sense from a public policy standpoint. There were a lot of ideas. There were a lot of people who wanted to make massive and very, what I think could be detrimental changes to law enforcement. The Chiefs Association, what we pride ourselves on is being the professional voice of law enforcement, and we seriously leaned into the discussion, and we helped provide insight and information and worked with the legislators as about 24 different reform initiatives were passed here in Minnesota. Now that 24 is at the high end of reform efforts in the country. Many states made small changes, 2 or 3, 5 or 6 different legislative initiatives. Minnesota was among the highest in terms of the number of reform initiatives that actually became law. And on the screen here, I won't read all of them, but you'll see that in 2020 we made about 14 different police reform changes here in Minnesota. This continues on with some of the different changes that were made, legislatively changes that were made here in Minnesota. 22, that theme continued. About another 7 or 8 different types of reform were made. As you'll see on the screen, regulating the use of no-knock warrants. Now that was a change that was made prior to what happened in the Amir Locke case in Minneapolis earlier this year, but there were a series of legislative reforms made here in 2021. Now we get to 2022 and the tide has shifted. While there's still a need and demands for some more police reform, what we saw happen, as you all know, is some serious increases in crime that came immediately after the situation in Minneapolis and the pandemic, and now the legislature was being pushed into what can we do to try and control crime, but at the same time continue the discussion about reform. Unfortunately, while all of that was happening, and I think there was a serious need for some legislative help to address crime and to help address police recruitment, not much was done. Here in Minnesota, we have divided government, which has its pros and cons. Unfortunately, I think the cons prevailed, and we didn't see much happen in terms of support or additional resources to help law enforcement deal with these very pressing issues. We did get a little bit done in the area of mental health data sharing, which is I'll talk about mental health as one of our more significant issues here in a second. Probably the most noteworthy legislative change that affected public safety is the legalization of THC edibles. Now, I don't know if you all heard much about this. As it was going through the legislative process, we normally hear a lot about issues that are going to affect public safety as it goes through the legislative process. Weirdly, we heard nothing about this one. Some people ask, Jeff, how in the heck, if you guys are so active involved in the legislative process, how do we end up with such a crummy bill on edibles? Well, because it happened in the dark of night. Literally, this legislation was passed without much, if any, discussion in the legislative committee hearings, but there was literally no communication with law enforcement. This is an example of how bad public policy happens. The thing about this, and whether you agree or disagree with the legalization of recreational marijuana, let's put that aside because I know that's an area that's got support on both sides of it. Most people were shocked to hear when this legislation was passed that THC edibles, which can be mind-altering, or in fact are mind-altering, would anybody agree in this room that you should be able to give a 12-year-old kid THC edibles? Raise your hand if you think that's a good idea from a public safety standpoint. Not many people raise their hand. Do you think it's okay to drink THC-infused seltzers when you drive a vehicle? Raise your hand. See, these are the questions that we would have asked if we would have been involved in the discussion, which we weren't. This is sad and unfortunate. I bring it up only to say we need to do better when we talk about public safety in terms of the different, more controversial legislative items that are going to be before us probably in this next year or the following year. The Chiefs Association definitely wants to be at the table. I know the Sheriff's Association, MPPOA, not to block legislation or to become kind of this barrier to the legalization of marijuana. If it's going to happen, we just want to be at the table so that we can learn from the other states who have done it and not hopefully have the mistakes repeated here in Minnesota. And unfortunately, what happened with this edibles law, that was not the case. All right, so today I'm going to cover three things real quick here that I think are facing law enforcement across the state, and these are the most challenging issues that I have seen, and I wish Chief Workey was here because he's been with me as we've traveled across the state of Minnesota this past summer to talk to just about every area, every county, just about every corner, every area of the state. We've had meetings with police chiefs, and these are the three things that they say that are the most challenging, most frustrating, and areas where they need the most help. Police recruitment and retention, crime increases. Now, I just saw the presentation by Chief Peterson. It looks like you guys are fortunate because there are parts of the state who have seen more significant increases in crime than what you're currently seeing here in the city of Anoka. And also mental health resources, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Recruitment and retention. Most police departments are down in terms of applications 80 to 90%. 5 years ago, there were a lot of people who wanted to become a police officer. Not as many as there were 10 years ago, but we have seen a significant 80 to 90% reduction in the number of applications for people who want to become police officers. Police officers are moving from one city to another. And the reasons for that are what you see on the screen. They're looking for competitive pay. Some cities are offering retention bonuses. When it comes to hiring new police officers, they're looking for recruitment bonuses. And the lower left portion of the screen matters a lot. Local support. Do they feel like the city that they're working in is going to support them? Not support them when they do something wrong. That's not what I'm talking about. Is do they feel like they're being supported by their city administration? Do they feel like they're being supported by their city council? Is the community supportive? And again, I want to make sure I reiterate, they're not looking support for bad activity. Nobody likes a bad officer more than a good officer. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just general support, and police officers will leave one city and go to another if they don't feel like they're being supported. But those are the main reasons why we're seeing recruitment being a challenge. This next slide shows you in the last 5 months, because there were 0 applications, the city of Ortonville, the city of Claris City, and the city of Morris, Minnesota no longer have their own local police department. They didn't have any applicants. They couldn't recruit. They couldn't find people who wanted to step into police officer positions. And so now the local sheriff has taken on the responsibility for policing those cities. And I think, honestly, as I travel around the state of Minnesota, that that's not the end of this trend. Unfortunately, there probably will be more in the coming months and in the next few years. There's a lot of lines on this slide. You don't have to try to read them all. But really what I'm trying to illustrate on this slide is there are far fewer people who are going to college to become a police officer than back in 2013. Some college programs have discontinued because there's not a demand for that educational program. Unfortunately, we've seen a significant decline in the number of people who are going to college. Minnesota, one of 2 states in the country that requires a college education to become a police officer. And so we view the pipeline to policing in Minnesota is look at the colleges and universities who offer law enforcement programs, and that'll tell you what you're going to have in the pool of candidates in the future. And unfortunately, we've seen that decline significantly in the last 3 or 4 years, and very significantly in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, there's a glimmer of hope that this past fall, we saw a little bit of an uptick over last year. We'll see if that trend continues, but we've got a long way to go to get back to where we were just a few years ago. That's number one, recruitment and retention, probably the most significant issue facing law enforcement departments in Minnesota right now. Chiefs across the state tell me that we are struggling to find applicants. We're struggling to keep our own staff. Number two, the crime increases. Now, again, the chief mentioned what's going on here in Anoka, but what the BCA released their crime report here just a few months ago, what it showed was a 21.6% increase in crime. Now, some people think, well, that's probably just because of Minneapolis. Well, that's not the case. Violent crime in greater Minnesota rose by 16%. That's historic. We haven't seen increases like that in decades. And in fact, the 21%, some would argue we haven't seen increases at that level in the history of the state of Minnesota. Violent crime in the 7-county metro area rose by 23.9%. Murders, a large percentage of these did happen in Minneapolis, but there were more in other parts of Minnesota than there typically are, in fact, significantly. 201 over 185, that's an 8.6% increase in that particular category. Aggravated assault, probably the most alarming trend that we saw, almost 11,000 aggravated assaults, 33.7% over the previous year. That should scare you. I'm just showing you the data, but that's alarming. So when people say this talk about increased crime is just, they're trying to kind of scare people. Well, this is what the data is showing us, and I've looked at this data. This is accurate. This is actually what is happening. Motor vehicle thefts rose by 8.5%. That's over almost 15,000 motor vehicle thefts in Minnesota. This is not just Minneapolis. Now, a significant amount of them did, but we heard and saw stories in the media that this has expanded into suburbs and other parts of greater Minnesota. Almost 800 carjackings in Minnesota last year. Unfortunately, this year we're on pace to be close to that. The year is not over, but there is a slight tick downward, but it's not significant. So that's number two, is crime increases. How are we going to handle this? How is law enforcement going to kind of address this? Going back to the legislative session, we were really hoping that with all of the surplus money that was available, that we could see at least a portion of that put into collaborative efforts to kind of do some regional policing again in trying to curb this violent crime. Unfortunately, there wasn't an agreement, and so we didn't see any of that surplus money, and law enforcement has just had to kind of deal with it with the resources that they have, which has been very challenging. Number three, mental health resources. So we hear a lot about mental health in Minnesota, a lot about what law enforcement does, because really when it comes to dealing with people in crisis, 911 is the most immediate kind of tool that people have, and that's obviously a police response in 95% of Minnesota. Mental health resources are extremely scarce. I talk with Sue Abderholden all the time, who's kind of regarded as probably the top expert on mental health in Minnesota, and she says, Jeff, the mental health system in Minnesota is not broken. The mental health system in Minnesota was never built. And so unfortunately, we're dealing with a significant issue, and we don't have the framework to really address it properly, so we're all trying to figure it out in a variety of different silos. And unfortunately, we haven't been all that effective, but we are making progress. There are more resources coming on board. Law enforcement is working collaboratively with mental health professionals and oftentimes embedding them in their department or working with them in multi-jurisdictionally. We're trying to figure out how to do this better and involve professionals when we go into the field and deal with people in crisis. Calls for service are increasing dramatically over the last 5 to 6 years. And the community expectations have shifted. We've all heard conversations about, law enforcement interacting with people in crisis and it ultimately ending with use of force and unfortunately and tragically sometimes a fatality. There's got to be a better way, and the community expects law enforcement to do better. They expect law enforcement to partner with other mental health professionals. Again, those resources oftentimes don't exist and the framework isn't there, but we are trying desperately to figure out how to do that. And again, many cities, I'm not sure exactly how your cities in Anoka County are, but many cities have brought on mental health professionals and are embedding them within their organizations to help them with that response. That's the mental health issue out in their communities. Now, sadly, mental health is affecting law enforcement as well. In Minnesota here, we have seen an explosion of disabilities for police officers affected with PTSD over the last 3 or 4 years. In response to that, many cities have implemented programs to help address it and help provide their officers with mental health resources, mental health checkups, wellness programs. These are fairly costly programs. Oftentimes those mental health checkups can run over $10,000 for an agency, and that may or may not be in the budget. And so in some cases, they've turned to organizations like this in their community to help support that. But we have found that the mental health resources, just as lacking as they are in the communities, they're lacking within organizations as well. And we're trying to figure out how to fix this or how to address it. There's a lot more attention on mental health of police officers now than there has ever been. And to show you the data, again, you don't have to look at all the lines, but this slide will show you that in Minnesota here, we have seen disabilities for police officers skyrocket. In 2019, there were 118 applications for disabilities. In 2021, it rose to over 307. And so far through August of 2022, we've seen 180 applications for police and fire disabilities. Now, what the graph doesn't show you is that over 80% of those applications are for PTSD. 80% of all of the disabilities are for PTSD. And the slide on the right will show you the distribution of those disabilities. A good percentage of those are from the city of Minneapolis, but the other half are from communities across the state of Minnesota. Again, an area where we are desperately trying to figure out how can we provide our police officers and firefighters with the resources that they need. And most of these, 90% of these cases are from the law enforcement or from the police side. But how can we provide police officers with the resources that they need to process the trauma that they see on a daily or nightly basis in the field? We're not there yet, but we're working hard to try to figure that out. And it is incumbent on all of us, I think, in leadership. We're asking for some help from the legislature to figure this out as well, but we have to figure out how to help these first responders better deal with the trauma that they see and experience during a career in law enforcement and public safety. So, those are the 3 areas that I think are probably most concerning to law enforcement professionals and law enforcement agencies in Minnesota. What can we do about it? What can you do about it? It's events, it's organizations like this that I think are probably going to be the most effective. It's kind of a local level. Engage with your local police department. you guys, obviously today is an example of how the Anoka Anti-Crime Commission is doing that. Again, I don't see this across the state in all areas, and this is exceptional. Continue to demand accountability. We totally understand that communities want to see their law enforcement agencies be held accountable. We understand it. We agree with that. Continue to make sure that that is happening. But lastly, most importantly, I think law enforcement needs to see and hear support. It has been a tough few years, and some people would say, well, you brought that on yourselves. And to a certain extent, we agree, we can do better. I'm not going to deny that. But at the same time, law enforcement has been, I think, unjustly beat up in some areas. And law enforcement officers in many places don't feel the type of support they need to feel comfortable to go out and really re-engage doing proactive police work. Maybe that's not the case in Anoka, but I can tell you I've talked to police departments across the state. If they don't feel that local support, if they don't feel like if things are done specifically a certain way, that support may go away, I think law enforcement officers are doing a great job in Minnesota. I've been across the state. They work hard, they're courageous, they're trying to do everything the right way. It's a dangerous line of work. Law enforcement is probably one of the most dangerous. In fact, this year, I just looked yesterday, we still have close to 200 police officers killed in the line of duty this year. Over 70 of them were killed feloniously, which means there's a portion of those that are categorized as killed in the line of duty because of medical emergencies, but close to 70 of them were either shot, stabbed, or killed by a vehicle assault. That number, unfortunately, is trending upward over the last few years. For a long time, it was trending downward, but about 3 years ago, it started to go back up. So law enforcement, I'm just here to say it's a dangerous job, it's a difficult job. The officers are out there trying to do their best. They really need local support. The communities, you guys are doing a great job here in Anoka. Communities across the state, I think, are doing fairly well. You're going to have an opportunity, and I'm going to wrap up here in just a second here, but the election day, Tuesday, here in a few weeks, I think we're putting out a statement here in the next couple days on this, that what we've seen in Minnesota over the last 2 or 3 years has been disheartening for some. I think some of the criminal element feels emboldened over the last 2 or 3 years. That's perhaps why we see such an increase in crime. That's not Minnesota. That's not the Minnesota I grew up in. I don't think it's the Minnesota that you all grew up in. Law enforcement's going to continue to try to do everything they can to improve and do the best possible job that they can. We need local support. We need statewide support. I'm just asking, and the Minnesota Chiefs Association is apolitical. We don't endorse candidates. We don't provide funding to campaigns. But what I will say from a political standpoint is just research the candidates. Know what they stand for. Know what you want in Minnesota moving forward. Those crime increases, that's not the Minnesota that we want. We want top-notch law enforcement. We all agree on that. Law enforcement, communities together. But just know what you're voting for when you bring in when you make your decisions here in a couple weeks, because let's get back to having Minnesota being that place that everybody wants to be. Even though we have cold, nasty winters, it's a place that I loved growing up. I'll never leave Minnesota. I love this state, and I love the police officers that work in Minnesota. I was one of them. Now I'm kind of on the other side. I respect what they do. I applaud their courageousness and their willingness to stick with this career because it's just part of who they are. And I think we just need to get back to being supportive of law enforcement, making sure that they have the resources and the support that they need to help keep you all safe. I want to thank you guys for having me out here today. Thanks to Chief Peterson and to the Anti-Crime Commission for letting me come in and make a few remarks here today. You guys are a great organization. It's again, great to be back home here in Anoka County, even though it's not the city that I grew up in. It's a suburb of the city I grew up in. But thanks for having me here today, you guys. I wish you guys the best. Thank you to the police officers and all of the law enforcement folks in the room. I know you were already recognized once, but I want to say thank you for what you do. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for getting out there every day and every night and helping keep this community safe. Thanks, everybody.
Good job. You got him riled up. Thank you, Chief. Don't go too far, Chief. We do have a presentation to make. As we all know, Anoka is a Halloween capital of the world, and we'd like to recognize that with our speaker. So we've invited Bill Benditsky from Anoka Halloween to make a presentation to our guest speaker, Chief Potts. So, Bill? Chief? Here he is.
On behalf of Anoka Halloween, we would like to welcome you to here, to the city of Anoka, and invite you to our festivities. All right.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Chief. Very good. This concludes our program today, folks. 9 o'clock. We always shoot for 9 o'clock. I want to thank once again all the folks who were involved in the preparation of this event. Treasurer Tom Jensen, Chief Peterson, Administrative Assistant Julie Splitstozer. Julie always does a crackerjack job. I want to once again thank the tavern, and I want to thank the table hosts. You should thank your table hosts. And most importantly, I want to thank all you folks, number one, for attending, and number two, for your generous support and contributions to the Anoka Community Anti-Crime Commission. Have a great day. Drive safely. Thank you.